My name is Tal Kitron with Applerouth Tutoring Services. I'm a tutor and executive function coach. Been with the company since 2013. And today we're going to talk a little bit about final exams, which are coming up for most students. So whether you're a student or a parent or guardian or teacher, these should just be some tips that will help get through this pretty tough time and prioritizing grades, especially if we're 11th graders, which is a lot of what Applerouth works with. These grades are super important. And so final exams can be a big percentage for each class. Applerouth offers EF coaching, as I said, test prep, ACT, SAT, PSAT, and also academic tutoring. We can look more at that at the end, but for today, here's what we're going to be covering. And you should notice that closed captioning is enabled. You can also just click out of that. And if questions do come up today, please put them in the Q&A and we'll make sure we get to those at the end. I anticipate this presentation taking probably a bit under an hour. We'll definitely get out within the hour. So things we're going to look at include creating the correct attitude towards school and finals. So sometimes that's a little shift, sometimes it's a big one. How to effectively use our working memory. So what can we keep in our brain at one time? Effective study methods, improving working memory and memory generally. And then test anxiety is a big thing for a lot of people, so mitigating that. Then finally, we'll look at a game plan for final exam week and test day itself. One of the big differences between types of students when it comes to school and finals generally is proactive versus reactive. As you might expect, we'd much rather be proactive. So good study habits, you can see this person has a very clean study area, backpack doesn't look totally messy, headphones on, so must be listening to some music without lyrics because you don't want lyrics that can interfere. And so really we're talking about planning ahead, prioritizing, being organized, and those are all qualities of a proactive rather than a reactive student, right? Reactive would be we procrastinate and then realize, oh crap, this is due tomorrow. And then we're in trouble. Proactive students generally know what to expect. So they're coming to school the next day, they know what's due. They don't procrastinate. So if we know something's due on Friday, but we need to go to office hours on Wednesday, we'll start it before Wednesday. Proactive students ask questions, right? They aren't afraid to ask questions early and often. Before we ask questions, we make sure we have full understanding of an assignment without making any assumptions. We are having distributed practice and study across the semester, not just studying and cramming at the end. Proactive students, therefore, usually get pretty good grades. And often that is also manifesting in college apps. So getting into good schools, getting college apps in early, and that can be a big benefit. Reactive students, on the other hand, and I've worked with many of those, both with tutoring and executive functioning, but reactive. So if this sounds like you or your student, it might be because we're missing deadlines and then ask the teacher, hey, can I get an extension? Or like, what can I do to improve my grade? Right, so we're postponing to the last minute. We're not asking for help, right? So we're just kind of assuming we know what to do. Trying their best and hoping the teacher won't grade too hard. I mean, that is, I think, a little bit counterintuitive. Usually, if we're hoping the teacher won't grade too hard, it's probably because we're not trying our absolute best, right? So, or that may just be a lack of understanding of the assignment. So I see a lot of reactiveness with students who are disorganized and not great at planning. But those are skills that we can develop. And then you'll also see this when it comes to college. We have fewer college acceptance offers because we've waited and maybe grades aren't as good. Right, so this is obviously a broad brush, but these are some big differences between proactivity and reactivity. Generally, we do have this knowledge innately of how to be proactive. So like if I'm coaching a student or even tutoring, I would ask, so you're experiencing testing anxiety or you're concerned about this final exam. Let's talk about why, right? So and let's talk about situations in the past that have worked. So maybe this person's an athlete and they've gotten better and better at volleyball over the years. How did they do that? right? Did it happen overnight, or was it distributed practice and hard work and effort, right? How could that maybe relate to our environmental science exam, right? Or if you're a musician, how'd you get so great at playing the tuba, right? Well, practiced it. And it wasn't, maybe 5 hours a day wasn't helpful, but an hour every other day was. So that would be an insightful piece of information that could help someone study for finals and know what works best for them. So try to relate it to past successes. I think that's a big thing. And a lot of what executive function coaching is developing this curiosity and a growth mindset. So not, it's a lot of, what's important is positive self-talk. We don't want students to say, when they make a mistake, oof, oh no, and be scared to make similar mistakes. Instead, mistakes are really important things. We need mistakes. We can learn the most from things that we don't do well on. If you do like a 20 question math section, we're going to learn way more from the 3 questions you miss by going back over them than the 17 questions you got right. Right? So mistakes are not only okay, but they're important and good. So I try to instill that in all my students. This is a safe place to make mistakes. It's okay to struggle, right? Some of the most rewarding things are the most difficult. And certain people have trouble initiating a task. Some people have trouble persisting through it or finishing it. And others have trouble with all of those. So it's really just making this a safe place to not be perfect. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Here's an acronym for the greatest study plan of all time, GOT, greatest of all time. And just some kind of big picture things that you can keep in mind. One is we always do want to have goals. So the G is for goals. Come final exam season, we want specific goals. So if I'm working with a student and we're coaching, about, hey, I've got 4 upcoming final exams. In that week's session, we might say, okay, our first thing is we got to get this final project done. And the next thing is, if we can, let's also do this assignment for another class. We don't want to overload students because burnout's a real thing. We want to set a goal. If it's, I have a C in Spanish and I want to make it a B, we then think about, well, what would I need to get on the final exam to do that? Are there any assignments I can turn in? Once you set those goals, that's often a jumping off point to tell us really the way to achieve it, right? What must we get done to set ourselves up for achieving the goals that we set on finals? The O is for organization. And this is a big part of executive functioning as well, where I see a lot of students with just crammed backpacks. They don't know where anything is. They don't have one spot like in their phone or an Excel spreadsheet or even like a portal like Canvas where everything lives and they know where to go. So it's really important when studying and really all throughout the school year, you just got to be structured, got to be organized. You got to have a place you go where oh, this is work time. So we're limiting distractions and trying to inhibit those things. Make sure you've got physically what you need as well as digitally. If you know you're going to get distracted, you need to maybe put your phone away or on airplane mode. And then even when we're scheduling, right? Schedule study time and break time, right? Organization is different for everyone, but most high school students very much lack an organization. They try to keep it all in their brain at once. Some can, but others have trouble. The A in GOAT is for attention. So again, we want to remove distractions. I think doing shorter clumps of work, like 30, 45 minutes rather than 3 hours of work at a time. So we work for 30, 45 minutes. We schedule in a break for 10 or 15 minutes. But if you know there's certain things that suck your time, like a video game or a certain social media app, maybe that's not what we can do during that break. So this break would be to go and get a little bit of fresh air, get a snack, drink some water, but I'm not going to allow myself to get sucked into Snapchat or whatever it is. And then finally, T is for testing, not the testing like final exams, but testing in terms of how to review for a test. Meaning, it's not just I want to look at the teacher's notes and read them and feel like I'm good to go. It's I need to look at these notes and my notes and any other relevant materials and then actually teach it. Make sure that I could teach it to someone else, right? If that's the mirror or a pet or a parent, that's fine, right? Study groups can also come in play here. But the biggest thing is actually creating, writing stuff down, generating answers. The act of doing that helps people on finals immensely, rather than just saying, okay, I think I know this, and on the test, I'll be fine. If you actually write it at home, even though that's a pain in the butt and time consuming and effortful, then by the time you get to the test, you've already done it, right? You just have to redo what you've already done, and you have the confidence that you can. So testing is a big one. We'll talk more about that. So as a teacher or parent or coach, the questions that come up are, how can we encourage effective and efficient study methods? How can we encourage proactivity? And there's no like right, or there's some wrong answers, but no one right answer for that. Every student's different, their profile is different, and what motivates them internally is different. So that's the big thing as a coach, is find the internal motivation. Kind of all stems from there. And just to look a little bit more at memorization, because I think it's such a big part of finals. Like a lot of classes are just like US history, it's just memorize all this stuff. Math, there's some formulas, or unit circle, we might just have to memorize. Again here, generating something. So looking at the unit circle is fine, but drawing it yourself and labeling each point, that will cement it in your brain. I talk a lot with students about metacognition, which is thinking about the way we think. So that's, again, we're driving this through a lens of curiosity, trying to figure out, when I'm trying to memorize this, like what works, what has worked, or like what types of things always exit my brain. And maybe if it's a math formula, we just need an effective device to memorize it. The big thing with memory generally is just we have to link ideas. And one way to do that is to make sure that you review something about a day after you've initially learned it. There are other ways to kind of help cement information. So a lot of people say that taking a nap after learning something, just a short nap, can help ingrain it. A walk in nature, right, or meditation, just going off topic after learning something, can help you really retain it. But the big thing is revisiting it, right? There's this thing called the forgetting curve, where if people don't review something, it will gradually seep out of their brain, right? We've all got stuff we've learned and forgotten. And I'm amazed by like juniors and seniors in high school, they've got so much packed into the last few years that they're already forgetting geometry and stuff because they're trying to pack in new pre-calc and calculus and tough math. So don't just study right before the test and cram. You want to be studying early, and then the day before the test should be our review, where we're really kind of looking at the struggle areas and locking some things into place. The thing I see a lot of students do is try to keep a bunch in their head at once. So we can only keep so much in our working memory. And what tends to happen is the more we learn, the more we forget. It's just naturally going to happen. Working memory, even though we can only keep a certain amount in at one time, we can perfect that, and we can work on that and develop our ability to both build more working memory, but really to prioritize what has to stay on the tip of our brain. What I mean by that is, and what this really comes down to, is forcing yourself to recall something. That's what I mean by generating like an essay or a short answer. So like, if maybe we're talking about an English final exam, where our job is to write an essay about a book we read. And we know we're going to come into class and it's an open book test, but we only have an hour to write an essay. Before the final exam, looking at some sample questions, maybe we know the final exam question, maybe we know some options, write an essay. Write down at least one essay with an intro and thesis and body paragraphs and conclusion. Right? You want to be thinking about how long does it take you. You can time it with your smartphone and just use the stopwatch function. And hit lap every time there's like a milestone. So, okay, it took me 5 minutes there to read the essay question and develop my thesis. It took me 10 minutes to write the introductory paragraph. And then I had 45 minutes left for 3 body paragraphs in conclusion. Someone who doesn't practice that is more likely to run out of time at the very end, right? Or not prioritize the more important things in their essay because their pacing is off. I think the big thing with this slide is just understanding that if you don't revisit 24 hours later, if you don't force yourself to recall something, it's not going to stick, right? Nobody's going to be able to just say, okay, here's all the presidents, right? I'm going to memorize them in order and then never look at it again. But if you do it, and then again the next day, and in 5 days, and 2 weeks, and a month, maybe you could then recite all the presidents in order. Force yourself to recall it and make sure that you're testing yourself on it. If we don't link the ideas and they're not connected, there's just these ideas floating around, but we haven't tied them to a greater plan or purpose, they're probably not going to stick, right? So that's what I mean by linking ideas to build good memory. So if this is a history class, we know these 4 units and we understand them, but how do they link together, right? Maybe zooming out and looking at the big picture, chronology wise, right? And just as far as what happens societally, that might be a good thing to do. There are a bunch of ways to link ideas. One of them is by developing mnemonic devices. We've all seen them in school, like PEMDAS for order of operations. SOHCAHTOA, a very interesting one for sine, cosine, and tangent. A lot of people struggle with that. Just knowing, oh, I can't remember ever how to spell mnemonic. M comes before N. I've learned some from students, like what's the difference between affect and effect? A student taught me Raven, which stands for remember that affect is a verb and effect is a noun. And so for some people, if they can remember Raven, that's good enough. And now they know the difference between affect and effect. There is no such thing as a mnemonic device that is like too goofy or corny or bad. Anything works, right? As you can see here, some of these are kind of silly. How to know a word like decorous, right? Well, oh, decorous, like decorative. So it's similar meaning. That could help you trigger yourself to remember that word. Roy G. Biv for a rainbow. Here's EGBDF for reading music. I never learned that one. And as a teacher, parent, or coach, like make sure to test this. So if a student says, hey, I've got a way to memorize it, make sure that they could recite it, right? That's the testing and teaching it to you. It's like, oh, do you really know quadratic formula? Yeah, I learned it to the tune of Pop Goes the Weasel. Okay, what is it? What is it? Prove it. And then if the person can recite it, then yeah, they do know quadratic formula and will be able to recall it and test it. So a little bit into specifics on what do we do? One of the first things when final exam season comes up is review your notes. Like obviously we got to know what's the final, gather all the information that we have from the teacher. But I do find that a lot of people benefit from color coding notes. So some students will say, okay, well, for US history, anytime it's about a famous person, I'll make it this color. Anytime it's events, we'll make it here. Or if it's just an overall concept, that can be a different color, right? So then we've kind of divided them up, and that tends to create these patterns and help people link ideas. So it helps with memory, right? You could do the same thing for math and just change colors for each little thing. Formulas are red, vocab is blue, and then proofs are green. This is obviously applicable for any tests, but especially finals, which is what we're here talking about today. Again, trying to develop that curiosity with the student. Here are some questions that I think are important to answer to create these links in memorization and just really neural connections. All of these are just who, what, where, when, why, how questions. The big key that most people won't think to do or will resist because it's effortful is then actually writing out the answers. So, okay, I know what to expect on the final. These are the questions I'm going to be asked. Let me actually write them out, right? If this is not a multiple choice test, but a short answer test, I better write out my answers so that I can recreate that, right? And it'll be easier to recall on test day. We're not then reinventing the wheel on final exam day. We've already kind of done it, right? So generation, writing stuff out, super important. You may find as you review your notes that there are some gaps, or you may find that there are some topics that you just don't feel as good about, you're a bit fuzzy. Knowing that that could happen is important, and managing your time is a huge key to being successful on finals and in school generally. So as we plan ahead, we kind of work backwards from the test date. We think, how much time do we have to prepare? What are the couple days, and especially day before the test, going to look like? A lot of times there's like SAT, ACT, and the student's going to have like a football game on that Friday night before the test, right? That's a nightmare scenario. That doesn't usually happen for finals, but you do see conflicts, or people have got finals back to back and they don't plan out the studying well. And so they have to cram and they're rushed for the second test. And as a parent, sometimes that falls on deaf ears when kids are 15, 16, 17, they don't want to hear what mom and dad have to say. But that's where a tutor or a coach can help, or really just maybe slight supervision. Make sure that these students are setting up a plan that works for them. So this is all about building a system. Again, whether that's in your phone, which usually it is, but we're scheduling breaks and really making sure our time is managed properly. Before we even review our notes, we got to figure out what's on the test. So this could be on the syllabus at the beginning of the year. So make sure we track that down. This could be on like a portal like Canvas, or maybe there was a study guide. Figure out what types of questions, how many. There should be no surprises on test day. If you have any questions, ask the teacher or a classmate, figure it out. What do written responses need to look like? Is there a grading rubric? If it's a math test, will I get partial credit if I do a few steps right, but don't get the answer right? Or is it correct answer or bust? Right? If we know these things, that'll save you time and make you more efficient on testing. I mentioned study sessions earlier as a good way to do testing. So like, hey, can you really teach this to me? Can I teach it back to you? That demonstrates mastery of a subject. Got to make sure that everyone's there for the right reason, right? So if someone's there just because they feel less competent in that subject and just want to kind of leech off some friends or classmates, not going to be ideal for the people who are really well prepared. Make sure if you do set up study sessions that it's more structured than laissez-faire. It's not, hey, we're just going to get together with no set starting or ending point. It'd be better if everyone has a certain task, right? And we have a time frame where we're going to present it and then be done by, right? That'll keep you guys on task. Again, they can be good, they can be very bad. It also depends on the person. Some people really like studying alone and prefer that, and others thrive when they've got other people to work with. And then we're going to look at one of our instructional design team and tutors plan of action for the few days before the test. But general advice would be good sleep, which most people are going to scoff at because like seniors don't get great sleep generally. But the night before the night of the test, so the night before the test is the most important, because then you can get some circadian rhythms going. So if you can get a good night's sleep on Wednesday for a Friday test, that makes a big difference. But just get some rest, don't pull an all-nighter. Make sure you eat breakfast, protein's good. We always want to set out what we need. So again, we want to eliminate any extraneous things that could go wrong. So I've got all my materials ready to go. And affirmations from a tutor or coach, I'm always big on positive reinforcement, but I think from parents, it's good. Even self-affirmation, we're like, okay, well, I did study, for the time I said, I planned this out, I did what I could. I wrote out my answers. I know what to expect, right? Confidence can be a big thing, especially for students who suffer from testing anxiety. Speaking of which, there is this kind of curve where there's optimal anxiety, where we've got this stress level of my adrenaline's going, pumping. I know this is an important thing. It matters, so I better get ready for it, and I better, perform. That's good, whether it's a musical performance or a sport or a test or just or a presentation. A little bit of nerves is a good thing, right? If you don't have nerves, it usually shows a lack of effort or motivation or both. You also don't want to, so that's eustress if you're in the good zone. You don't want to get into this zone of too much stress. That's unhealthy. That's when we get overwhelmed and overloaded. So when we start to think about things that aren't in our control, or past testing experiences that didn't go well, or just negative stuff in general, and we're no longer positively visualizing what's going to happen, that's the unhealthy anxiety that we're usually talking about that can affect people. Even if you have test anxiety and you experienced it, it's something that can be coached and helped. A lot of it is the metacognition. So thinking about okay, what is it that is happening on these tests? Am I losing focus? Am I not prepared? Right? So if you can have this inner coach, higher self saying, all right, I've done what I need to, I'm ready, right? I've got all these other people taking the test. I know I'm as prepared as them, if not more. And then during the test, maybe we run into a roadblock. This happens a lot where it's like, oh crap, I knew this yesterday, now I don't. And so we just want to stay on that question. Usually the right move is skip it, right? Go past it, get some more points and say, all right, if I'm struggling, I bet everyone is. Not a big deal. I'll come back if I have time. This is much easier said than done, right? It can be coached, it can be developed. But those students who have this inner coach and higher self talking to them perform much better on exams. We also want to name and tame that anxiety monster. So if you know you have testing anxiety, what are the things that we're anxious about? Really try to get to the bottom of that. Is it all of these things? Is it like perception of others? Is it perception of parents? Is it fear of failure? Specifically, what am I afraid of? What's the worst case scenario? Is it like a self-fulfilling prophecy where I feel like I always do badly? Most of these will be misguided thoughts that can be kind of tweaked and developed, but it's really important to understand what is my inner self saying that's making me anxious. Right? And these are just a few examples. So even just like naming that can really help. So here's Rupert, the anxiety monster, but just saying, okay, well, what I'm anxious about is if I don't get this grade, then snowball effect. I'm not going to do college, blah, 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 blah. What we have to do then is try to kind of bring that back and say, well, let's come up with a specific goal for this test and this grade, and let's not worry about the stuff we can't control down the road. You can control this grade, which might have a positive effect down the road. Let's just name that and focus on that. You can see here the difference between if you've got an anxiety monster and a nice coach, right? Hey, they just said 5 minutes left, right? So, okay, let me get whatever points I can, review that one question I said I needed to, and then I'm done, did what I could. And a lot of people hear 5 minutes are like, oh no, like this is what I thought would happen, right? And they panic and don't make good use of that 5 minutes. So coach versus anxiety. And it's all about confidence. It really is. It comes down to self-efficacy, self-confidence, self-esteem. And a lot of that is built by affirmation, positivity, but also effort, practice, and successes. So celebrating little wins. Maybe you had like one really good midterm exam, carry that into the final, right? And like if another midterm didn't go well, try to figure out what went differently. How can we bring this successful strategy into this other class? But yeah, confidence, momentum, those are big. So before we get into just a few last things on test day and test week, what we've talked about so far is proactivity versus reactivity. We want to be proactive, think ahead, plan backwards from the test date. We talked about the GOAT studying plan. So goals, being organized, maintaining attention on task, so figuring out what your distractions are, and then testing, so generating forced recall. You want to make sure that we have effective methods like mnemonic devices for memorization and linking ideas rather than keeping them separate. Students need a lot of support during exam week. Sometimes that support is, hey, just don't make me anxious and pressure me, leave me alone. Others, it's you make them high protein snacks and brain food, and making sure they're getting sleep and not nagging too much, which is a balance. But ask them what they need. A lot of students will tell you. And then we talked about testing anxiety and how we want a little bit of nerves, but not too much. And then I added this note, we want to help create a positive outlook toward their exams. I think confidence, positivity is just so important because so many kids are down on themselves or presenting as low motivation, with often it's just a lack of skill. So they're not actually low motivation, they just are afraid they're not going to do well or aren't up to speed with the other students. This is Sarah Fletcher, who we call the math fairy. She is a tutor, but also part of an instructional design team. And I just wanted to include, she's got this kind of nice 5-ish slide plan. Some of it will be a review, but then this is a good way to end and may prompt some questions. So if you have any, please put them in the Q&A. But she thinks of testing as planning for battle, right? So we talked about using the syllabus or study guide. Like, we need to know everything. If you don't know what's coming on the test, we can't prepare properly, right? Sometimes math teachers let you bring a little note card with formulas, or science teachers too. And if you don't bring that, we're in trouble, right? Because everyone else has an advantage that we don't. Is it all multiple choice? Are there short answers? What's the timing? Do I get partial credit or not? Can I use my calculator or no, etc. And then on that line, do we have a study guide? I mean, study guides are tremendous resources. They could be online. You might have been handed a paper one. Some people have them swimming in their backpack and don't even know. You always want to look to your notes and then previous tests or quizzes. So maybe the teachers handed them back and we've got some information there. And then maybe there's a textbook with end of chapter questions that you might want to start to write down answers to. A lot of times people have an online portal now where most of the assignments are just there. So it depends on the class. And then Sarah says, well, now it's time to start making our plan. So we're looking at physics final. How much time until the test? Okay, 2 weeks. How much material do I have to review? A ton. What should this review look like? Well, am I prioritizing like certain chapters that were more confusing? Probably yes. Is it about vocabulary? Is it about like relationships between different chapters? And that'll lead us to some self-reflection on what's worked in the past and what hasn't. So if you realize, man, this final last year really didn't go well. And I remember what happened was I worked in a study group and I didn't like that. This year, I'm not going to do a study group. Think about where you're going to do a review. So for finals, it might be good to change locations so that you're not just saying, okay, well, I'm at my desk, I remember all this stuff, but as soon as I leave it, I forget. That happens. So think about maybe ways you could cement it. We learn it here, and then I go review it at my friend's house or in the library, right? If you learn it a few different places, it might stick better. That's a good trick for finals. It's really just about thinking about what's worked and what hasn't. We want to have everything organized. So making sure that everything lives in the same place, whether that's a binder, right, or stuff digitally. A big part of executive functioning is inhibiting distractions. Some people are really good at planning and prioritizing, but then when it comes to it, they just can't, they lose focus because they're distracted by usually phone or something else. So how can we mitigate that? Well, I know that I personally sometimes get distracted when either if I'm not busy or just I know there's like, let's say an important to me sporting event. So I know I'll check scores. If I know that I have to work on a presentation and that'll distract me, I'll just put my phone on airplane mode or put it in a different part of the house, making sure that if my wife has an emergency, I'm contactable, but I can't tempt myself with my typical distractions. Make the easy pathways hard. So if you know it's easy to just get on the phone and start texting, make that harder for yourself. And if it's harder for you to sit down and start a paper or a study session, make that easier, make it appealing. Set yourself up with a nice, well-lit area that's organized. And it's just like, okay, I'm gonna go sit down for 45 minutes and work, right? Building in a break as your carrot for when you're finished. And then as we're planning for finals, I think a lot of people don't do this till college. I certainly didn't, although I should have, but making a schedule. So scheduling in break time, how long, right? No more than an hour at a time usually. Switching things up. So you're not doing like physics, physics, physics. It's like physics, a little bit of history, a little bit of Spanish, and then back to physics. Much more effective. And Sarah agrees. This is the chunk, chew, and check method, where you take these little chunks and then you like just marinate on that for a bit, whether that's while you're walking or napping or just writing some short answers, and then revisit it 24 hours or a couple of days. Setting up a schedule is one thing, accountability is another. This is another time where if you're getting nagged by parents, it might have the reverse effect that we want. So a coach can help with that. Maybe a friend can be someone who just helps you be accountable. It doesn't have to be someone in a study group. It might just be like, hey, I think we're supposed to do this today. Is that right? Here's what I did. What did you do? Right? That could help. Maybe you need a table or you need a spreadsheet where you can like put everything in green where you've done stuff. I think a lot of people benefit from like this list and checking things off, even if it's the easy stuff first. And then looking ahead, we talked about asking for help, right? Knowing who to ask and how. So knowing like, well, man, there were some gaps in here. I was gone for a week and I missed this chapter. I might need to go to office hours. So just knowing when those are. Parents or friends or coaches can run through flashcards. A lot of people really do like doing flashcards just to memorize vocab or little concepts. Talked about study sessions, and if you're really feeling like, man, it's calculus and I'm way behind, maybe a tutor could help. That is, of course, an option. Applerouth has a lot of great academic tutors. I don't do a whole lot of that, but we got people who could teach AP anything and help you with your final exam, right? They just do in-school class tutoring. And then finally, we got the plan, we need to enact it. So actually scheduling out your sessions, whether it's individual or group or both. Take these checkpoints so that you have kind of, progress. So it's just really like, okay, by this time, I want to make sure I've got like a quarter of my notes covered. And then if you didn't, think about where did my time go, right? And how do I change that? And it's okay if it's not working, right? I'm glad that she put this in. You have to be gentle. It's really easy to spiral when it's like when you get discouraged and overwhelmed. You got to break it into discrete tasks. No task is too small, so break it up into little chunks. And just know that this is a process. We're all developing our executive function skills as we get older. And even with coaching, you're not going to immediately just have it clicking. So like even with ACT, you're not taking that test once and going to be one and done. Almost everyone has to take it 3 times, right? ACT or SAT. Same with studying, right? Just because I've got this new process doesn't mean it's going to work perfectly for me. We have to do it and then figure out what did work and what didn't. That's all I've got today. Again, what Applerouth offers is executive function coaching, which they can help with a lot of this planning and prioritizing, test prep for ACT, SAT, and then in-school academic tutoring. The coolest thing about the executive function coaching, I think, is this mind print. So it's the initial like mock test for your brain. You can do that, complete a diagnostic, and decide whether it's something that would be helpful. We usually do like 30-minute sessions twice a week to start. And then as the student builds their system and takes ownership, you try to cut it down to like 30-minute sessions. It's mostly, I've got like middle school students, juniors in high school is a big one because it's such a tough year and important grades. And then some seniors transitioning to college and also college freshmen. So really any age. We are going to launch a quick poll. So that should come up in a moment. And we got plenty of time. So I'm going to leave it open for a few minutes for questions, whether that's about any of the strategies we talked about or something different or Applerouth. You should see that poll launch now. Let's just see if any questions come in. And of course, if you don't have questions and feel satisfied, certainly no keeping you here. So you can feel free to log out of the meeting. I'm going to keep it open for just a couple more minutes in case any questions come up. Here's a good question. So the question is just, are there any tips for AP exams, which for most people have just passed, but like if you're, if you're a sophomore or a junior or senior, you're probably taking some APs each year. A lot of students are. AP exams are usually for college credit. They are often following an actual AP class. So I'd say it depends. If you're in an IB program or like a program that doesn't gear it straight towards the AP test, so maybe you've taken AP environmental science, but the teacher didn't lecture directly based on the AP exam. That's a different story. So then that's where I might get a tutor. I would consult the Barron's books, which are all pretty good for APs, not necessarily for ACT, but Barron's review books are really good. It's also kind of similar where you just got to know the format, right? So like, I want to make sure if I'm taking AP French, is there a recorded part of it where it used to be like you'd actually have to talk into a microphone, right, and answer verbal questions. And if I didn't know that coming into AP, that'd be tough. So it's mostly about knowing the material, and AP exams tend to repeat material. So past tests are good things. People who've maybe taken it in years past. And then there's a whole lot of specific AP review materials. Yeah, the AP exams are big in May. The other tip I have is if you can plan to not take the SAT in May, it's usually a good option. I have a lot of students who did, but because of AP season, they were just so overburdened that they were not rested and didn't do great on their SAT because they had to expend more energy on AP exams like that week. Tips for not much time to prepare for AP environmental science. Honestly, if it's something like that soon where it's tomorrow, I would, with discretion, go on to probably like Reddit or go online. And maybe even like there's probably some sample Barron's stuff. But if you Google AP environmental science, like past tests or questions, that's what I would do. And I try to answer questions if it was me or I don't have kids, but my child or my student. That's what I would do. I would review, notes that I have. I would just Google past like test questions to see if I can come up with anything that might give me an advantage for tomorrow. Right? It's like, okay, well, they've tested this a bunch. Let me make sure I'm competent to answer that. So it's that, and then just brushing up on anything that feels like a little bit weaker or just not as much of a knowledge base about. Most of my students who've had AP environmental science and had a teacher who taught to the curriculum have tended to feel that that test was fair and done pretty well. So fingers crossed. You're very welcome. Seeing no more questions, I think we can call it a day. Hope you guys got a lot out of this. Please feel free to reach out to Applerouth at the phone or email below, and have a great rest of your evening. Good luck for this final exam season.